everything was really, really a last moment. My son persuaded me because I'm actually on tour.
At 81 years old, Diana Ross stood above Times Square in a red sequin gown, singing like a woman who had never suffered a day in her life. But behind that flawless, glamorous smile lies a history of devastating trauma. This is the dark, untold story of the losses that would have broken anyone else, and the hidden side of the most legendary woman in American music. The girl from Detroit who changed everything.
Thank you. It's good to be something, you know what I mean? Thank you very much.
There are voices that belong to a specific moment in time, and voices that belong to all of them simultaneously. Diana Ross has always been the second kind. From the very first note she ever committed to tape inside a small recording studio on West Grand Boulevard in Detroit, there was something in her delivery that refused to be contained by decade or genre, or the particular fashion of whatever era happened to be playing outside the window. She did not sound like the 1960s. She did not sound like the 70s or the 80s. Oh, she sounded like something older and more permanent than any of that. She sounded like the truth. The world heard it immediately, and it never stopped listening. Diane Ernestine Earl Ross was born on March 26, 1944, in Detroit, Michigan, the second of 6 children born to Fred Ross Sr. and Ernestine Moten Ross. Her father worked at the American Brass Company. Her mother was a woman of warmth and discipline who raised 6 children with the particular focus of someone who understood that the world was not going to make room for her family without being persuaded. The family lived first in the Brewster Douglas housing projects in the east side of Detroit, one of the largest public housing developments in the country. A place that produced an extraordinary number of artists and athletes and leaders who carried the lessons of its compressed, communal intensity into everything they ever built. She was not the loudest child. She was not the most obvious future star in any room she occupied as a girl. What she had was something quieter and more durable than conventional childhood talent. She had presence, the kind that does not announce itself, but fills a space so completely that people look up from whatever they were doing without quite knowing why. Her teachers noticed it. Her neighbors noticed it. The girls she sang with on front stoops and in school hallways noticed it. And eventually, inevitably, the music industry noticed it too. She attended Cass Technical High School, one of Detroit's most academically rigorous public schools, where she studied costume design and fashion, alongside students who would go on to distinguish careers in every field. She was social and stylish, and already developing the visual sensibility that would later make her one of the most photographed women of the 20th century. But even at Cass Tech, even surrounded by genuinely talented young people on every side, she stood apart in a way that resisted easy explanation. She began singing with a group of girls from the neighborhood in the late 1950s. Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard were among them. They called themselves the Primettes, and they had the ambition of young people who have not yet learned to be realistic about what ambition costs. They wanted Motown. They wanted Berry Gordy. They wanted the building on West Grand Boulevard that everyone in Detroit's music community already called Hitsville, USA, and that was producing hit records with the efficiency of a factory and the passion of a movement. Berry Gordy did not sign them immediately. He thought they were too young. He told them to come back after they finished high school. They did not wait. They hung around Hitsville so persistently, showing up to clap and sing backup and make themselves useful on other people's sessions, that the building essentially absorbed them before Gordy had formally decided to let them in. That persistence was not accidental. It was the first demonstration of a quality that would define Diana Ross for the next 6 decades. She did not accept the word no as a permanent condition. She accepted it as a temporary one and kept moving until it changed. Gordy signed them in 1961. He changed their name to the Supremes, and then he did something that altered the course of the group's history and Diana Ross's life in a single decision. He moved her to the front. Florence Ballard had been the group's lead voice. She had the bigger instrument, the more conventionally powerful sound, the kind of gospel-rooted delivery that the early Motown style was built to showcase. But Gordy heard something in Diana Ross that Ballard's voice did not have, a quality of yearning and intimacy that communicated directly to the listener in a way that bypassed the ear and went straight to something deeper. He pushed Diana to the front. The decision fractured the group's internal dynamic in ways that would take years to fully surface. It also produced one of the most remarkable runs of commercial success in the history of popular music. 12 #1 Billboard Hot 100 singles between 1964 and 1969. Where Did Our Love Go? Baby, Love, Come, See About Me. Stop in the Name of Love, You Can't Hurry. Love, You Keep Me Hanging On. Love, Child. Each one arriving with the precision and the inevitability of something that had been inevitable all along, as though the songs had always existed, and Diana Ross had simply been the instrument through which they finally became audible to the world. They performed for royalty. They appeared on every major television variety program in America. They toured internationally and were received everywhere with the kind of ecstatic response that transcends language and culture and the particular social tensions of the era in which they were performing. In a decade defined by upheaval and division, the Supremes walked onto stages and made people feel something that cut across every line that divided them. That was not an accident of timing. That was the specific power of Diana Ross's voice and presence deployed at exactly the moment history required it. But underneath the sequined gowns and the choreography and the sold-out nights and the #1 records, something more complicated was already taking shape. A relationship that was equal parts professional and personal. A secret that was growing quietly alongside the fame. And a price that had not yet come due, but was accumulating with every passing year. The girl from the Brewster Douglas projects had changed everything. What everything was going to cost her was still being calculated. Love, secrets, and the price of fame. Berry Gordy did not just make Diana Ross a star, he made her who she was. That distinction matters enormously, and it is the one that has taken the most careful unpacking in the decades since their professional and personal entanglement finally came apart. He shaped her sound, her image, her presentation, her sense of herself as an artist and as a woman. He renamed the group. He pushed her to the front. He directed her in films. He produced her records. And somewhere inside all of that professional architecture, he fell in love with her in the particular way that powerful men fall in love with the people they have built, completely and possessively, and with a certainty that the love and the creation are the same thing. She told People magazine in 1977 that Berry Gordy had been father, mother, brother, sister, and lover to her. That single sentence contains more psychological information than most people have ever fully absorbed. It describes a relationship so total and so consuming that the ordinary categories of human connection had ceased to apply to it. He was everything simultaneously. And when everything ends, the loss is not partial, it is complete. Their romance ran alongside her entire rise to fame throughout the 1960s. It was not hidden exactly, but it was not publicly defined either, existing in the particular space that powerful men in the music industry of that era were permitted to occupy without explanation or accountability. She was 21 when it began. He was 36. She was the artist. He was the architect. The power differential was total, and neither of them, by their own later admissions, fully understood what they meant while they were inside it. The relationship began its final unraveling in late 1970, as she became pregnant with his child. By the time the pregnancy was visible, she had already agreed to marry someone else. Robert Ellis Silberstein was a music executive, tall, educated, genuinely fond of her, and fully aware that she was carrying another man's baby when he walked her down the aisle in January of 1971. What he was not told, what he would not discover until years later, was whose baby it actually was. Rhonda Ross was born in August of 1971. She grew up calling Berry Gordy Uncle BB. She looked exactly like him. Her sisters looked exactly like Robert Silberstein, 6 feet tall and Jewish American. And Rhonda looked like neither of them in a way that should have raised questions earlier than it did. She was 13 years old when Diana Ross finally sat her down and told her the truth. The man she had called uncle her entire childhood was her biological father. The family she had believed herself to belong to had been constructed around a secret she was the last to know. That secret cost everyone something real. It cost Rhonda the clarity of her own origin story during the years when origin stories matter most. It cost Silberstein a version of his marriage that had never quite existed. It cost Berry Gordy a daughter's childhood he had no official claim to witness. And it cost Diana Ross the particular peace that comes from a life lived without concealment, something she had surrendered before her eldest child drew her first breath. She and Silberstein divorced in 1977. The years that followed brought professional triumphs that would have satisfied most artists for a lifetime. The Oscar nomination for Lady Sings the Blues in 1973, in Upside Down, reaching #1 in 1980, Touch Me in the Morning, Endless Love with Lionel Richie, a solo career that stood completely independent of the Supremes' legacy and demonstrated that the voice and the presence were entirely her own, and had always been. Then came Arne Næss, the Norwegian shipping billionaire and world-class mountaineer who arrived in her life in the mid-1980s, like the answer to a question she had been asking since the Berry Gordy years ended. She married him in October of 1985. 2 sons followed. Ross Arne Næss in 1987, Evan Olav Næss in 1988. For 14 years, it looked like the love story she had always deserved. Then the truth arrived, and it looked exactly like the one she had helped create 30 years before. The years, the world stopped watching. There is a particular cruelty reserved for people who have lived at the very top of public life. When the fall comes, it does not happen in private. It happens in the same bright light that made everything look so effortless on the way up. Every stumble is witnessed. Every loss is cataloged. Every moment of genuine human fragility becomes content for the same machinery that once celebrated the triumphs. Diana Ross learned that lesson across a stretch of years in the early 2000s that tested everything she had built and everything she believed herself to be. But before those years arrived, a loss came that she had never fully recovered from and never fully would. Florence Ballard died on February 22nd, 1976, in Detroit. She was 32 years old, the girl who had stood beside Diana Ross at the very beginning of everything, who had been the original lead voice at the Primettes before Berry Gordy moved Diana to the front, died on welfare in the city, where they had both grown up, dreaming of exactly the life that Diana Ross was currently living. She had been dropped from the group in 1967. She had struggled with weight, with alcohol, with the particular devastation of a woman who had been at the center of something historic, and then been removed from it before the rewards arrived. Her estate at the time of her death was valued at nothing. Diana Ross has never spoken about Florence Ballard without visible pain, the guilt and the grief and the complicated love of a woman who knew that the same decision that launched her own career had contributed to the circumstances of Florence's destruction were not things that time made simpler. They were things that time made heavier. Florence was gone at 32, and Diana Ross was still performing to sold-out arenas. And the distance between those two outcomes had never required an explanation that fully satisfied anyone, least of all Diana herself. The new century arrived with professional disappointment following close behind. The Return to Love reunion tour in 2000 was designed to bring the Supremes back together for one final celebratory run. Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong refused to participate. The reasons were complicated and old, and rooted in decades of tension that the public had only ever seen the surface of. Diana recruited Latter-day Supremes members Sherry Payne and Linda Lawrence as replacements, and the tour launched with considerable fanfare and insufficient momentum. The audiences did not come in the numbers the production required. The reviews were not kind. The tour was canceled halfway through its scheduled run, and the reunion that was supposed to close the chapter on one of music's greatest stories ended instead in the kind of quiet public embarrassment that lingers long after the box office figures are forgotten. Then her private life, already carrying the weight of the Arne Næss betrayal and the divorce of 2000, delivered its most devastating blow. In January of 2004, and 4 years after their divorce was finalized, Arne Næss fell 320 feet to his death while climbing alone in the Groot Drakenstein Mountains near Cape Town, South Africa. He was 66 years old, an experienced mountaineer who had led a Norwegian team to the summit of Everest in 1985. He had climbed thousands of peaks across a lifetime spent at altitude. He slipped on his way down, He was gone before anyone could reach him. 7 years later, Diana Ross sat across from Oprah Winfrey and called him the true love of her life, the man who had fathered a secret child with another woman while married to her, the man whose betrayal had ended 14 years of what she had believed was the love she had always been building toward. She still called him the true love of her life, because grief does not organize itself around what a person deserved. It organizes itself around what a person meant. The years of the DUI arrests followed, the rehabilitation, the probation, the public record of a woman moving through genuine pain without the privacy that pain requires. She moved through it anyway, because Diana Ross has never known how to stop. The woman who refused to disappear.
The scenes that never.
There is a moment in every great career when the world decides it is finished with you. It does not announce the decision. It simply redirects its attention towards someone younger and louder and less familiar. And the silence that follows is supposed to communicate something permanent. Most people hear that silence and believe what it is telling them. They step back. They accept the revised terms. They find a way to exist in the reduced space the culture has assigned them, and they call it graceful because the alternative requires too much. Diana Ross never heard that silence as a verdict. She heard it as a pause, and she filled every pause with work. The years following the early 2000s were not the years of a woman in retreat. They were the years of a woman rebuilding in full view of anyone willing to look closely enough to see what was actually happening. The arrests and the rehabilitation and the personal losses had been real, and they had been public, and she had moved through them without the protective mythology that some artists construct around their difficulties. She had simply been human, visibly and undeniably, in ways that the Diana Ross of the sequined gowns and the perfect performances was not supposed to be. That visibility cost her something. It also gave her something. It gave her the particular authority that only comes from having been broken in public and choosing to continue anyway. She continued, consistently, deliberately, and with a commitment to her craft that did not diminish with age but appeared, to those who watched her work across those years, to actually deepen. She returned to the stage with the kind of presence that defied every reasonable expectation about what performing at her age and after everything she had been through should look like. The voice was not what it had been in 1968. Nothing is what it was in 1968. But what replaced the pure instrument of her youth was something that younger singers cannot manufacture regardless of their technical gifts. It was authority. It was the weight of every song delivered across 60 years of genuine living, pressing down into the performance and making it mean something beyond the notes themselves. Audiences who came expecting nostalgia left having witnessed something closer to testimony. She performed in venues across the world and sold them out with a regularity that the industry found difficult to explain, using its conventional formulas about aging performers and shrinking audiences. She appeared at tributes and awards ceremonies and cultural events and brought to each one the same absolute commitment to the moment that had defined her from the very first night she stood in front of a microphone and understood that this was the thing she had been built to do. Then February of 2021 arrived and took something from her that no performance could replace. Mary Wilson died on February 8, 2021 at her home in Las Vegas. She was 76 years old. The cause was not immediately released. Diana Ross woke up to the news and posted to social media that she had just learned of Mary's passing and was reminded that every day is a gift. She wrote that she had so many wonderful memories of their time together. She said she was sending love to Mary's family. Those words were careful and true, and beneath them lay something the public had no right to fully access. Mary Wilson was the last living original Supreme, the last person on earth who had stood beside Diana Ross at the very beginning of everything, who had been there for the Primeets rehearsals and the Hitsville hallways, and the first #1 record, and the television appearances and the international tours, and all of the complicated history that came after. Now she was gone. Florence had been gone since 1976. Mary was gone now too. Diana Ross was the last one standing from the group that had changed popular music, and she was standing alone. She kept performing. In March of 2025, she played 2 sold-out shows in New York City and told the crowd from the stage that she was never going to retire. The audience responded the way audiences respond when a performer says something that is not a line, but a truth. They believed her immediately and completely because everything about the way she stood on that stage confirmed it. She was 80 years old, and she was not performing like a woman saying goodbye. She was performing like a woman who had somewhere else to be. The 2025 Met Gala was the moment that stopped the world. She had not attended the Met Gala in 22 years. Her return was announced with the particular quiet confidence of someone who understands that their presence requires no advance explanation. She arrived in an 18-foot feathered shawl that required 6 people to manage and swept the entire staircase as she ascended it. The gown beneath was breathtaking on its own terms. But what made the appearance unforgettable was the detail that nobody saw from the outside. Embroidered on the underside of that 18-foot train were 13 names. The names of her 5 children and 8 grandchildren: Rhonda, Tracy, Chudney, Ross, and Evan. And then the 8 smaller names of the grandchildren who had arrived across the years and filled the spaces that the losses had carved out of her life. She had created the gown together with her son, Evan, and designer Ugo Mozzi. She had worn her entire family on her body and ascended the most famous steps in fashion, carrying all of them with her. The photographs traveled around the world within hours. The comments were unanimous in a way that social media almost never is. People who had never agreed on anything found themselves agreeing on this, that they were watching something rare. A woman who had survived everything that life had brought to her door and had arrived at 81 years old, still ascending, still adding names to the train, still choosing to carry the people she loved into every room she entered. On New Year's Eve 2025, she stood on a platform above Times Square in a red sequined gown and performed Ain't No Mountain, high enough to a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could follow, exactly 50 years after the song had first taken her to the top of the charts. She told the crowd she was grateful for all of her blessings. She blew kisses from the platform as confetti fell around her. The woman the world had watched stumble and grieve and struggle and survive was standing above the city in sequins, telling the world she was grateful, and every word of it was true. So 81 looks like when you have survived everything.
Look it down. Hold on, right here, look at me.
Step all the way back from the sequined gowns and the Times Square platform and the 18-foot train embroidered with 13 names. Step back from the sold-out shows and the Met Gala photographs and the social media comments about how impossibly beautiful she looks at 81. Step back from all of the visual spectacle of a life lived at maximum luminosity and look instead at what is underneath all of it. Look at the actual weight of what this woman has carried across 8 decades of living in full public view, without the option of putting any of it down. She lost Florence Ballard at 32 years old, a girl she had sung with on Detroit street corners, before either of them knew what Motown was, before either of them understood that the sound they were making in their teenage years was going to outlast everything else about the era they were born into. Florence died with nothing. She died in the city where they had both started, on welfare, without the rewards of the history she had helped to make. Diana Ross was performing to sold-out arenas while Florence Ballard was dying in poverty, and the distance between those two outcomes is not something that a person carries lightly or forgets cleanly or resolves with the passage of time. It lives in a specific place inside the chest, and it stays there. She built a family across 3 relationships, each one carrying its own particular complexity and its own particular cost. The secret she kept about Rhonda's parentage from 1971 until her daughter was 13 years old was not a small thing. It was a decade of daily maintenance of a reality that did not fully correspond to the truth, sustained through Grammy performances and world tours and film sets and magazine covers, while a little girl called the man who was her biological father Uncle BB, and never thought to question why she looked so different from her sisters. The moment Diana Ross finally told her daughter the truth was a moment of enormous courage and enormous consequence. Rhonda has spoken about it publicly with a grace that reflects the care her mother ultimately brought to an impossible situation. But the years before that conversation were years of a secret pressing against the inside of a life that looked from every external angle like the most glamorous existence in the world. Arna Nace was the love she believed she had finally found after everything the Berry Gordy years had cost her. She gave him 14 years. She gave him 2 sons. She built a life with him that operated in a quieter register than the one her career occupied. A private life of family and travel, and the particular intimacy of two people who have chosen each other in the full knowledge of who the other person is. And then the betrayal arrived in the form that betrayals always arrive in when they are most devastating. Not from a stranger, from the person she had trusted most completely. Another woman, a pregnancy, the mirror image of the secret she herself had carried 30 years earlier, reflected back at her from the other side of the glass. She divorced him in 2000. 4 years later, he fell 320 feet down a mountain in South Africa, and she lost the ability to ever fully resolve what they had been to each other. Grief without resolution is its own specific category of suffering. It is the grief that cannot find its ending, because the person who would need to be part of that ending is no longer there. She called him the true love of her life 11 years after he died, and the words still carried the full weight of everything they had been. Not the betrayal, not the divorce, the love. Because the love was real, even when everything around it was not, and she was honest enough and brave enough to say so out loud. The early 2000s asked her to carry all of that privately, while also navigating the DUI arrests and the rehabilitation and the canceled reunion tour and the public record of a woman who was struggling in ways she had no framework to hide. She did not construct an elaborate public narrative around any of it. She did not hire crisis managers to reframe the story or give carefully orchestrated interviews designed to rehabilitate her image on her own terms. She moved through it the way she has moved through everything in her life, by continuing, by showing up, by refusing to accept that the hard chapter was the final one. What emerged on the other side of all of that is the woman standing above Times Square in a red sequin gown at 81 years old, telling the world she is grateful. And the remarkable thing, the thing that separates Diana Ross from almost every other figure in the history of American popular culture, is that the gratitude is not performed. It is not the gracious public statement of a woman who has learned to say the right things in the right rooms. It is the genuine, hard-won, fully earned gratitude of a woman who has looked at everything her life has contained and made a decision about what to do with it. She decided to keep going. She decided that the names embroidered on the underside of an 18-foot gown were the answer to every question her life had ever asked. 5 children, 8 grandchildren. Rhonda, who found out the truth about her father at 13 and grew into a woman of extraordinary grace and talent. Tracy Ellis Ross, who inherited her mother's cheekbones and her mother's instinct for a room and her mother's absolute refusal to be anything other than exactly who she is, and who has built one of the most acclaimed acting careers of her generation on a foundation that bears her mother's architecture in every visible detail. Chudney, who has built a life outside the spotlight with the same quiet purposefulness that Diana Ross herself demonstrated every time the world's attention drifted elsewhere. Ross and Evan, the sons she had with the man she called the love of her life, who carry in their faces the evidence of a love that was real, regardless of what surrounded it. 8 grandchildren, Bronx and Ziggy and Jagger and Everly and Leif and Indigo and Calloway and Rafe. 8 new reasons to keep ascending staircases and performing above crowds and telling audiences in sold-out New York venues that retirement is not something she is considering, because life is still generating reasons to show up for it. She told a journalist in 2025 that the secrets to her health and happiness were staying busy, sleeping well, eating well, and maintaining a love for what she does. Those 4 things sound simple until you hold them against the life that produced them. Staying busy when the world has given you every reason to stop. Sleeping well when grief and guilt and the particular weight of a life lived at this level of intensity are the things sharing the pillow with you. Maintaining a love for what you do, when what you do has cost you marriages and friendships and the private self that ordinary people are permitted to keep simply by not being Diana Ross. She has maintained it across 65 years of professional life. Through Motown and the Supremes and the solo career and the films and the Las Vegas shows and the world tours and the comeback performances and the Met Gala staircase, she has maintained an absolute and undiminished love for the act of standing in front of an audience and giving them everything she has. Diana Ross has lived a life so full of love and loss and triumph that no single performance or headline or gown could ever contain it. Now you know the whole story.